Yeah, welcome. My name's Dave Reek. I'm a product manager for Tableau, and the feature that I work on is Tableau Bridge. Here today to tell you a little bit about it. But before we get into Tableau Bridge, I wanted to tell you about a few things that I really love. So this is my family. This is Halloween. This is a little while ago. And you can see we've got Puss in Boots, and that's 11 from, what was that great TV show? Nobody knows what Julian was dressing up as, but he had a good time, so that's awesome. And another thing, wow, feedback, I'm in. Another thing that I really love, I like to bike. I ride bicycles a lot. This is halfway through a ride between Seattle and Vancouver, Canada, so an international ride. You can see that we're drinking bicycle fuel here. And so that's with a couple of my coworkers. That was a great trip. That was lots of fun. And one other thing I really enjoy is I love working at Tableau. I love working on this product, on our product. And I love the people. And this is one of my favorite photos. This is Andrew Beers, who's our CTO. And he is our CTO, but you can see that his badge actually reads regular employee, that's exactly right. It's a great group of people to work with. So very pleased. And one other thing that I love to do is I like to make Tableau Bridge, the feature that I work on, more delightful for all of you. So let's talk a little bit more about it. This is an intermediate class, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time explaining the very most basic things. If any of this sounds confusing, certainly don't hesitate to ask me questions. That'll go great. I'll stop and we'll ask. Please ask questions. But also, if you get a chance, you can look through last year's deck, which is a little bit more educational. This is a little bit more in depth, a little bit more. But I do want to give you a little bit of groundwork first. Bridge actually has 5 jobs. It's easy to think that it really only does one thing, and that one thing is it connects your on-prem data to online, which is important. If you're in online, you probably have some on-prem data. But there's 5 different things it does inside that. So it has 2 main jobs that we'll talk about in a minute, and a couple administrative or sort of management jobs. We'll also talk a little bit about how to scale Bridge, about security, and how to use Bridge with a larger group of people. A couple different models for doing that. And then some features that are coming up in the future. So what does Bridge do? I said, hey, Bridge maybe only has this one job, but really it has 5. And it's helpful to think about how Bridge does its work as 2 different jobs because they're engineered very differently. First main job is refreshing extracts. So at a scheduled time and date, getting a bunch of information out of your database, pushing it up to online. The other capability that it has, it's fairly new, we just added this last year, is the ability to run live queries. So even to your on-prem database, make the query, get the data back whenever you ask for it. And the things that most people don't think about are the other things that Bridge does. They sound a little bit silly to talk about, but we'll explain more about why. Installation, authentication, we'll talk about that in the context of security, and also how to manage a set of clients. So let's get started. Refreshing extracts. This is, we'll start with the analogy first. I don't know if you guys remember these discs that used to come in the mail with your TV shows on them. Refreshing an extract is a little bit like talking to Netflix and saying, hey, I want you to send me that DVD. Like, it'll show up, but it's not something that happens right away. It's something that sort of happens on a scheduled basis. A principle that you should bear in mind about how Bridge works in this mode is that the person who's signed into the Bridge client, they're the owner, and they're sort of in charge of what happens on that Bridge client, at least for extracts. There's a little caveat that I'll tell you about at the bottom here. There's sort of 2 different ways to use Bridge in this context, either what we call a private publisher or centrally managed, and I have a whole set of slides on that, so I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but you could think about it as either I'm doing it myself, it's just DIY, and I only really need to care about my own data, or no, I have a large organization with many people publishing many things and needing to manage that. Something that I'm going to hit on again and again, one of the primary ways that Bridge keeps things secure is by making only outbound connections. So if you work at a company, and I imagine most of you do, or even if you're at your house, almost every connection you have to the internet goes through a firewall. But hey, you can still browse things on the web. Outbound connections, when you initiate one from behind the firewall keeps track of who you're talking to and what's coming back, so that you get all those replies back from web servers. And Bridge works in a very, very similar way. We'll talk much more about that as well. So just a couple things to, oh, sorry, I forgot. For extract refreshes, Bridge keeps database credentials locally, which is it's not entirely intuitive, but it is a little bit more secure. Well, this is another thing we'll talk about again and again. But let me actually walk you through this diagram here real quick to explain a little bit about how this exactly works. Any questions so far? Talking too fast? Everyone can hear me? Anyone still awake? All right, good. Okay, some people still awake. Awesome. Okay, so you can see our diagram here. There's Tableau Online in that big cloud up there. And the big square box down on the bottom is what we would call, this is really a computer, but it's running a Bridge client. And then you can see the database over on one of the directions, left or right. I can never tell which. But when, I'm not going to talk about the entire scenario of how you install and set up, but imagine that you had already published an extract. When you sign into the Bridge client, what it does is it polls. So it just phones online, calls online. It's about every 5 minutes and checks to see, is there any work for me? And when it goes and gets that work, that's actually step number 1 here. If it calls and says, yes, there's something for you, what we get back is a Tableau data source file or a TDS file and a schedule. So the TDS file contains the query and the database connection information that we need in order to actually make the query. We just get that and hold it and wait for the scheduled time to come around. I'm going to close this laptop here because I keep thinking we're on the welcome screen. Okay, much better. We get that. We do continue to phone home and check to make sure that nothing's changed with that schedule or that we don't have other events that are coming up. But we basically wait until the time that the schedule is supposed to run. Then we actually retrieve credentials from the local from the Windows Credential Manager. So this is secure OS-provided storage for secrets. So we get credentials out of there, pass those to the database. We get results back. Can anyone guess the next step? Right. We publish those back up to online. So this is just basically taking a copy of the query that you asked for in your database and pushing it back up to online. And what that will actually mean is that the data source that you have has new data in it, which is great, because when you open your viz, you get to see the new data. That's good. Questions about this? Yes. Yeah. I am going to try super hard to repeat the questions. We'll see how well I do. I think your question was, when the Bridge client gets the TDS file, does it get it at the time that it actually performs the query, or does it get it as early as possible? We get it as early as possible. In fact, when we start up, the way that the Bridge client UI, I don't have a picture of it here, but we'll see it in a little bit. The way that we know what to display in that Bridge client UI is based on, yeah, we've already gone and gotten the information. So we get it, but we do check to make sure that it hasn't changed, you haven't canceled the schedule, things like that. All right. So that's a little bit about how Bridge does refresh extracts. Next question is about live queries, and we'll sort of run through the important information first. This is a little bit more like streaming, where you say, hey, it's not that I want to watch this TV show in 2 or 3 days. I got to get my Daredevil right now. Like streaming, when you go and ask for it right now, you might spend a few seconds waiting for things to start up, but should work just fine. All these slides will actually be available to you along with some resource files afterwards. I do want you to take photos, though, because my mom loves photos. So if you could just mail them to me, that'd be awesome. But don't worry too much about taking photos, or feel free to. But hopefully this is all available for you afterwards. So a little bit more like streaming. A key difference between live query and extract refresh is that we really focus on the site administrator as a person who is sort of in charge of things and making things work and get set up. And also another key difference is that if you have more than one bridge client, they work together. This is really only for the live query element of things right now, but that'll come along. So because we spend more time thinking about the site administrator here, the way this model works is what we would call centrally managed. The secure outbound connection things that I talked about a minute ago, still true. But another key difference is that we pass the database credentials as part of the query itself, as opposed to being locally stored. So we're going to go through this little diagram here the same way. This flow is a little bit easier. There's one very interesting difference, though. When Bridge makes polling connections to online to check for extracts that we were talking about in the last slide, it makes a connection and hangs up. It makes a connection and hangs up. But that won't work for live queries, right? Because you can't poll for a live query. So what we use is something called WebSockets. It's a protocol very much like HTTP. The major difference is that WebSockets connections can be much longer lived. And so when you set up the Bridge client to make live queries, we actually call online and just keep the line open, even though there's nothing being said on it. And so those connections, we actually recycle them. They actually last about 30 minutes each, and we have a handover process where, before one connection goes down, we actually reestablish another connection, so totally transparent and invisible. Also, WebSockets, they're just like HTTP. There's a, is it proper to call it insecure? There's an insecure version of it, which is HTTP, and there's a secure version of it, HTTPS. WebSockets has a secure version as well. We use the secure version. All connections to online always use secure connections. So step one is that when you sign in, we establish that long-lasting connection, and then we just kind of hang out. It's like you call someone and just, like the line is open. We're just waiting for that query to come down. The reason we make that outbound connection is, again, for the firewalls. But once the connection's made, if a query comes from online, and that's typically initiated by a user clicking on a viz and saying, hey, I want to see the data that's inside this right now. That query just comes over the connection. We talk directly to the database, get the results back, and push them back up to online. Fewer steps than the other one. Any questions about this? Yes? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to repeat the question, but tell me if I got it right, because I'm not sure. Hey, your question might have been, how can I pick? How can I say this client is this and this client is that? Or as an administrator, how do I know which one is which? In the site admin page for Bridge, you can actually pick right there. And essentially what it comes down to is extracts only or extracts and live. There are a couple other things you can do to influence that, but that's the easiest thing to do. Was that actually your question? I totally got it right. Yeah, go ahead. Caching. No. The question was, does Bridge do caching? Bridge itself does not. However, all the other layers of Tableau do. And so it's not that you're working outside of the caches. It's that those caches will happen far faster actually in online. You wouldn't want to make a query and then send it across the internet to get to a cache. You want it to be as close to where the viz is actually being rendered as possible. Other questions? All right. So I said that Bridge has 5 jobs. So the other ones are ones that we don't think about so much. There's sort of givens, like, hey, we're going to talk about installation. Pretty much every piece of software you know has an installation package with it. So we do too, but there's some news about this. When we first started producing Tableau Bridge, it was a feature of Tableau Desktop. which is good. We've got a lot of distribution that way. But it's a little bit troubling because if you wanted to run more than one, you have to start thinking about licensing. The licensing model for Tableau is really based on the idea that you're understanding new things and having insights. It's not really based on refreshing extracts. So we made it its own thing that you can download, install as many as you want. This also gives us the ability to release far more quickly. So Tableau Desktop typically releases on a quarterly cycle or monthly cycle. Bridge, actually at this point, we can release as often as weekly. We don't guarantee to release every week, but I think so far we have been. There's a link here. One of the tricky things, one of the new things is that because it is separate, you have to go and get it. It doesn't come as part of desktop. So you can always find it at that URL. And because most people found it in desktop, in the desktop menu on server, where you used to go and say, start Bridge client. If you don't have a current version installed, it will actually just say, let's go install it and take you to this page. So you should be able to find it pretty easily. You can still start Bridge client from inside desktop and start from all the other places you would expect as well. One interesting note that we'll talk about a little bit later on, if you really want to send out a bunch of different Bridge clients, installation can be scripted. The script, we'll take a look at it in a few minutes here. And one note that we do get questions about from time to time, what do I need to run this? Well, you need a Windows box. Best practices are best practices don't put Bridge on this. Put it on a machine that's always going to be on. Put it on a machine that is managed if you can. Because like most computer applications, if you turn it off, it stops working. So I do have people call and say, yeah, it's on my laptop. Like, well, that's nice, but you might want to move it. The specs or tech specs for the machines, this is basically the same functionality that you would expect from desktop, so same size machine, 2 cores, 4 gigabytes of RAM, that's perfectly fine. You can get by with smaller than this. But we get people who ask questions about this. If you were to bias your decisions about hardware, bias towards more RAM, Bridge runs much of the Tableau stack, including Hyper, which is our in-memory database. And because it's in memory, things go a little bit faster if you have more memory. One of the reasons people ask questions about this are like, if I put the Bridge client on a giant server machine with 16 cores and a bazillion gigabytes of RAM, like, is that the way to scale it up? That will make things go faster, but really what we'd want you to do is have more clients rather than a bigger machine. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is. Questions about this? Annoying guy? No. Okay, good. All right. I didn't really mean annoying guy. He seemed like a very nice person. Okay, so something else that many applications do, signing in, but we do get questions about this. Bridge supports all of the authentication types that online supports, and those are, you can integrate it with SAML, so stronger identity link between your own networks and online. And we also work with something called Tableau ID, which is a username password scheme. One interesting note is that if you have Tableau Desktop or other Tableau products signed into online and you start the Bridge client, we will just automatically sign in with that identity. And because people typically end up running on Bridge as a service account, sometimes you can get a little bit tricked up here where it's like, oh, I'm already signed in. Who am I signed in as? If you need to sign out, there's a little menu item that says unlink. So go and unlink. It'll ask you to sign back in. You can sign in with the account that you want. When you sign into a Bridge client, I talked a little bit about with extract refreshes, the owner is in control of what's happening. When you sign into the Bridge client, you become that owner. And whoever you're signed in as is that owner. And again, that's really only important for understanding, like, well, who can run work on this computer? Like, you wouldn't want to set up a Bridge client on your desktop and be attempting to run a query and then like, what's this other query that's running? Like, why is my computer so slow? So we try to make sure it's only your work that ends up on your computer. One other question that we get from time to time is, well, great, now that I've signed in, like, do I need to sign in again? Generally speaking, no. I've had people ask, like, well, do I need to sign in if I want to republish or when the refreshes run again? Nope. We use tokens to make our secure sign into online. And even if those tokens fail, we do actually capture credentials and keep them stored in the secure storage locally, so that if the computer's reset or goes offline for long periods of time, we can still sign in. And that the sign-in will actually survive installs too. So, other questions about this? Yes, go ahead. That's exactly right. So the question was, what account can I sign in with, and what are the licensing implications of that? The licensing implications are that the account has to be at least a publisher, and in some cases a site administrator. So yes, there really is a cost to it, but it's not like the same desktop licensing cost. And as it turns out, that account, you could use, like, if you sign in with your own account on a Bridge client machine, like a VM that you never look at, you can use your account for some other purpose as well. So you would be able to sign in from your laptop and see visits. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Great question. Bridge has two modes, and this is a confusing thing. The two different modes are called application mode and service mode. What you need to know about application and service mode is run in service mode. Application mode, so let me tell you a little bit more, but that is the bottom line. Application mode runs very much like you would run like Microsoft Word or anything else. As long as you're signed into the computer, it works. But when you sign out of the computer, it doesn't work. And the reason this is a problem is if you have it on a VM and you don't touch it, there's no reason for you to go and do anything about it, probably your corporation will automatically sign you out after a certain period of time, and things will stop working, and you will be sad. So service mode, it runs as a service, runs all the time. It runs even when you're not signed in. That's the key difference. It will not run when the computer's turned off, so please don't do that. But the tricky thing about that is you need to be a local administrator on the machine in order to actually be able to run as a service. Does that help? Yeah. Oh, okay. It's a great question. It's not actually about Bridge. It's actually about published data sources or data sources in general. How would I decide whether to use an extract or a live query? Go on. In both cases, I'm going to try and ask your question again after I answer it, because I want to make sure I've actually got the question right. I think your question was, hey, when you query for an extract, you're running a query. And when you run a live query, you're running a query. Aren't they all just queries? Yes, they are all just queries. The difference really is when they happen. And so some queries may return large amounts of data and may take a very long time to run. Those are typically things that you would run extracts for. Live queries, hopefully you're returning smaller amounts of data that would return quickly. Was your question about how to decide between them? Sure. The major difference is when you create an extract, it's about data timeliness. If you create an extract, the extract is as up to date as your last extract. So if you run it every day, your data is fresh every day. Live query, it's as timely as the last query, or at least the last query that made it all the way past the cache. So it'll take longer to actually return. Your extract is actually a file that lives in online. So those vizzes will actually load really, really fast. It's just that the data isn't quite as fresh. Live query will have fresher data, but may take a little bit longer to get there. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah, actually, I'd love to actually, let's talk a little bit more. Come talk to me afterwards because I want to understand what was actually happening. That's not how it should work. We will actually talk about a couple different models to share your bridge clients across a larger group of people. So we'll talk about it then, don't let me forget. But hang around afterwards too, because I want to understand what was happening, how you got in that spot. Yeah, go ahead. Uh-huh. Yes. I think your question is, if I want the bridge client to use my network identity or my Windows auth identity, do I have to be the one who is signed in and running it? Yes. There may be some ways, this is more of an operating system question, there may be some ways to actually assign and I don't know the answer to it. We could play around and probably find out, but you may be able to delegate the identity to a service. But generally speaking, yeah, if it's your identity that has access to your data, you need to be the person who's signed in and running it. And we're talking about signing into the computer, not signing into Bridge. Oh, you mean if the computer cycles for updates? When you sign in, so the thing I said earlier, run Bridge as a service, do that. If the computer reboots, it will automatically restart that service as your identity. All right, we're going to move on. One other thing that is a little bit newer, because we're thinking more about how to have people running many clients, Bridge has a management capability. There's actually two ways to manage Bridge clients. One is actually on the client itself. So here's a little picture of the Bridge client. There are things that you need to go to the client itself to do, but hopefully it's a relatively small amount of things. Obviously, you need to be on that client to actually authenticate. It will tell you a little bit of status about what's happening. Extract credentials and local file paths. This is where you enter them because they're actually stored on that computer. One thing that we just added very recently was an about dialog, which sounds a little bit silly, but hey, it tells you what version you're on so that you can know, oh yeah, I gotta go and do some upgrades. For site administrators, who are the people that we really think will be running multiple of these, there's actually a settings page that you can see in the background here a little bit, and this was a question somebody asked a few minutes ago. Right here, this is where you can say, hey, I want this client to run extracts only or live connections and extracts. This will tell you about the number of clients you have on your site, whether or not they're pooled or working together for live queries, and a bunch of other information. Here's where you can actually come and say, oh, I told Johnny not to run Bridge on his laptop because I was worried it got stolen, and it did. So here's where you can actually come and say, ooh, yeah, take that off our network. Make Johnny re-authenticate before he can sign in and start using things again. Other questions about this? Cool. So a little bit more in detail, how do we do all these things? One of the questions we get fairly frequently is, how does Bridge scale up? One of the things I'm personally really proud of is we run one of our development servers. Our main development Tableau server is actually a site in online. We have about 500 active users in a day, and many more than that, about 1,000 people using it all told. We use Bridge to keep our on-prem data fresh. So this is a little bit of proof that it actually does scale up. We have a fleet of about 6 clients that we use for our running live queries only. We keep our extracts on 2 other machines. These machines are beefier than what I said earlier, and really it turns out that this is just, it's because that's what we had. So the scale of these machines is not terribly important, but for reference, that's what they are. We do also have, in addition to these 6 managed clients, we have around 100 individuals who are sort of using Bridge in this private publisher mode where they said, you know what, this is my Excel file on my machine. I'm going to be the one to update it, and I'm going to be the one to keep it fresh. If you were wondering how to estimate this, about 100, 150 active users to one Bridge client is one way to think about it. Your mileage may vary, maybe very, very much. It depends a lot on the amount of work you're doing, the size of the work that you're doing, how customers are querying. So this estimator will give you a sense, but really it's like, sort of pay attention to what your users are thinking. That's probably your better barometer. One of the things I want to say here, this will give you a sense of how many Bridge clients to run. But if you're doing live queries, run 2. Run at least 2. That gives you a little bit of redundancy and allows us to spread the load. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there like a number of live queries that would suggest that? Or would you just have one live query
I think your question is, your actual question was, how many live queries do I have before I start thinking about adding clients? When we talk about a live query, in this case, we're talking about a published data source that's using on-prem data connected via a live query. So it's not that that one published data source makes the query, it stores the query, but users make the query when they open the viz or modify the viz or doing something else. So even though you have one published data source, if you have 10,000 users like checking things all the time, that's a lot of queries. So there's not simple math where you would say this many data sources is this many Bridge clients. You can actually do that a little bit more with extracts, but it depends more on the frequency of the schedule than it does on the number of data sources. Here's where we talk about 2 different ways of using Bridge client. I mentioned private publisher. You can see my friend Carl, the creator, up here. And Amanda, the administrator. Private publisher, we'll actually go into each of these in a little bit more detail. But private publisher, as I mentioned, is sort of the do-it-yourself world where you have like one data source or local files, or you're the only person using it. You're the only person publishing things. And so it doesn't really make sense that you have to go like find some other person and deal with the site administrator. You can just set things up and get started all on your own. Centrally managed is a little bit more where you have many publishers. You want to delegate the responsibility of keeping all those Bridge clients up to some other person, in this case, Amanda. In that case, your creators may need a little bit more information, a little bit more support. There's a workflow that they'll probably need to follow. And that your site administrators will get a few extra responsibilities, so things to think about there. And for viewers, the people who are looking at vizzes, like they don't need to know anything about this. It's just will work for them. So I introduced you to Carl a few minutes ago, and this is sort of how things would work for Carl if I was like, hey, I want to publish a data source that's based on an Excel file on my local computer. So step 1, let's go ahead and sign into the Bridge client. This is a one-time thing. Carl doesn't have to sign in every time he wants to publish something. But you can actually do it after you publish. It's easier if you do it beforehand. Switch to service mode. That's my general advice about application versus service mode. It's not necessary. Carl can get everything he needs in application mode, but when he closes his laptop or gets signed out, things will stop working. So service mode's a better idea. Publish your data source or your workbook. Just get that up to online. And then there's actually a little workflow in the publication process that allows you to pick, hey, what computer does this go on? Typically, in this case, it'll just pick your computer because you're the person who signed in. You can actually change this after the fact for a data source. If you go to the data source details page, it will allow you to pick, say, oh, I want to run it on this client or that client, or stop running this on a client altogether. And last thing is, like, you can just go to the Bridge client itself, check to make sure that the data source is there. If you have credentials for a database, this would be the place that you would have to enter them before the queries or extracts would start working. I said queries, which may have sounded like live queries. No credentials are necessary for live queries. But for extracts, yeah, you would need to do that if your database has credentials. You can also refresh things here just manually to test out if things are working. Just make sure everything's good. And then that's about it, actually. We'll talk about Amanda next. Questions about this? No, great, okay. Excellent, this really is an advanced class, cool. So that all works great if I'm sort of dealing with my own things, but imagine that you had 50 creators on your site. All of them are publishing. Some of them are trying to keep their local data fresh. How does this all work? So Carl, the creator, is probably gonna have to talk to Amanda a little bit. Amanda's our site administrator. In this case, she's got 3 clients set up. So when Carl starts to publish things, I'll just publish my, my data source or my workbook to online as normal. And then you gotta go get a hold of Amanda. And this, you can use the telephone or fax. Most people use email. Hey, I would like you to take responsibility for keeping this up to date. And the site administrator will actually go ahead and go into online and say, this extract runs on this bridge client, or just attach it to the pool. So let's go back here one. And then you can see it actually just ends up on that client there. Amanda will have to take the steps that Carl would normally take. So if you're using a MySQL database that wants you to use username and password, here's the time where Amanda would go and put those things in. But that's about it. Other questions on this slide? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there are actually. So I think your question was like, wow, this is like sort of a complicated workflow. I have to take a bunch of extra steps, and you know, if I happen to go to a fantastic conference, who's gonna like be this backup person to do this for me? So what are your plans around changing that? Because we have this principle of the owner controls what's on the computer, like that's one of the principles about how Bridge works, and it also introduces that limitation. A thing that we would like to do in the future is move Bridge more to this pooled concept so that online can actually just by itself say, hey, go pick the client that is available at this time. That's, sadly, that is not the sort of work that I could do, even in 10 years. So it'll take our smart devs longer than that. So it's not right around the corner, but it's definitely something that we're thinking about. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, that's right. The reason I talked about Bridge working in 2 different modes earlier is for extract refreshes. One extract works on one computer. For live queries, we do actually load balance across a fleet of clients. And that's typically the reason that Amanda would set up 3 clients in the first place. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. 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 That's it. Yeah, we would call that like a migration scenario. So, hey, your question was, hey, I've got these 50 publishers. They all set up their own Bridge clients, but now I want to all bring that in under central control. And so how do I do that? Set aside some time on your calendar. There's not a magic button that does this. But really what you would need to do is you can, let's actually go back a little bit here. Look, time is running in reverse. Back on this administrative page here, here's where you can actually go see the list of all the clients. So that will let you know who's out there, who's actually using it. You would actually go and find the data sources that are currently being refreshed. And on, let's see here. I had the page listed here in an earlier slide, but I'll have to go back to it. On the refresh details page for the data source, there's a little link that says refresh this extract on. There's a button there. And in your case, it would say, I'm going to imagine that you're Carl, but let's imagine that one of your 50 publishers is Charlie, and it will say Charlie 1. You know, it's on Charlie's computer. So you would just switch it from Charlie to to you. And you could also, after you're done with that, go through and actually sign out those clients. Like, there's not really a good reason to keep them running out there. So that'd be migration. Sorry, there's one in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
In that scenario,
Yeah.
whenever you change the computer that's running on, the client running on, from performing
Yeah.
you maintain the refresh schedules,
Yes.
even though you change the actual client.
Yeah. Yeah, the schedules won't change. You would set those two things separately. Yeah, go ahead.
Would it be like the live connection basically is almost the same as the server? So then why wouldn't you just calculate the extract on the server using the live connection database?
I don't think I understand your question. Could you say it again?
Well, the server could calculate, like could be able to calculate extract with the live connection.
I think your question is, can I use a live connection to make an extract on server?
What you can right now, but give us an understanding of why that is not the way it is working.
Tell me what you want. Like, what do you want it to do in the end?
Well, just not have the bridge actually calculate the extract, but the server could do that.
I think you're saying, server in this case is online. Hey, maybe my extract, if I had 10,000 users run a bunch of live queries, couldn't server just sort of accumulate that data and make an extract out of it? Yeah. So yes, that can happen, and it does, and we call that caching. But it doesn't quite answer your question completely. I think what you were saying is, hey, if I have these 10,000 users and they're running these queries, like, do we always have to go back and run the query, or can't you just keep that information in online? Yeah, you can, and that is what caching does. The other thing about extracts is that typically extracts, you're running a larger query for a larger data set. You know, you're getting everything in these tables or everything in this query. And when a user comes and looks at a viz, oftentimes it's filtered just for them. So it's not that you're getting everything out of the database or everything out of the tables. You're actually getting a pretty thin slice. What you described a minute ago, maybe eventually you would build up all the table in that database, but you wouldn't get it at first, and so that would be very tricky. Did I answer your question? Come find me after. We'll see what else we can do. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sure. Oh, that's a great question. Your question was, hey, if I've got all these people running these extracts, what if like 2 or 3 or 5 or 50 of them are basically the same thing? Aren't I like sort of wasting a lot of time? Yes. This problem actually isn't particular to Bridge. It actually happens all over the place. The proper answer to your question is that we have a future feature coming out, future product called Data Catalog that will help you understand, like, hey, look at all these extracts point at the same database. They're all using the same tables. Maybe we could consolidate these things. But today, no, there's not a simple way to say, this one is 95% of that one. Let's just get rid of one of them. I don't. But you should look up my friend Tyler Doyle. I'm pretty sure he's here. And ask him. He's the right person to give you answers on those sorts of questions. Yeah, sure. Other questions? Cool. All right. Here we go. I have talked a little bit about making a fleet of clients. And this, again, for a live query, this is really something we encourage for redundancy and load balancing and things along those lines. Part of the reason that we actually made Bridge its own separate installer so that you wouldn't run into these licensing problems. Install as many as you want. You don't have to have a separate account to sign into all of them. You sign in with the same account. Hey, if you have a question about should I run Bridge in application mode or service mode, simple answer, run it in service mode. We can talk more about that, why application mode is even there if you like. One interesting thing to note about Bridge is that we do actually have a scripted installation. So if you wanted to say, hey, I want to go off and like instantiate a new VM and build all the software up automatically, you can do that. And here's an example of one of those scripts. This is not a special Bridge scripting language. This is just basic installation scripting, part of a normal installation package. So it's nothing magical about this. This file will actually be, it's part of the materials for the class. So if you come back afterwards and take a look, you can actually download this as a file you can take home with you. And if that's challenging, like the easy thing to do is like run install /h, and it'll give you the list of installation commands. So also, this is the sort of thing that I could write in 10 years, this level of scripting. So a smart person would be able to do it in about 20 minutes, maybe way less. The best practice is install your bridges on VMs. It doesn't really have to be a VM. Just put it on a machine that you have reasonably good assurance it will always be on, it'll always be managed. One sort of cool thing I did want to show you, this is an architectural diagram that we worked out with Amazon of how you could use a Bridge client actually hosted in Amazon. You can do this, host your Bridge clients in Amazon and connect them back to your own on-premise data, premises data over a VPN. There are cases in which you would want to run special databases in AWS, and you may need a Bridge client to actually use the drivers to get there. Typically, if your data is already in the cloud, you don't need to use Bridge at all, but this is certainly a thing you can do. We actually run Bridge clients in AWS just as a means of testing to make sure that everything is working. So it's nothing about this that says your Bridge client has to run under your desk. Yeah, go ahead. Great question. Let me get back to you at a future slide. Ask me again. And your question was, hey, if I've got a bunch of these things running, like how do I know what's running where? And how can I, like, now do I have a conflict? Do I have two giant extracts running at the same time? Get right back to you. Other questions? You're giving away the punchline, man. One of the questions we frequently get about Bridge is how does it stay secure? I think we've already talked about outbound connections and secure connections quite a bit, so I'm not going to go into that too much. All the connections that you make to Tableau Online are secured using SSL and TLS. There's a lot of documentation about that. Be happy to talk to you more about it. If you really want to lock down Bridge's connections and activities more, the way that we connect to online is using fully qualified domain names. We do have a list of domain names that you can say, hey, this client can only talk to these domain names. If you set that up, that's an even higher level of security where you can say it's not going to go any other place on the internet. So that's available in some of our help. Questions about this or Bridge security in general? All right. So what's coming next, my friend? One of the things that we know, Bridge actually runs, extracts run successfully like the vast majority of the time. But when extracts do not run successfully, we're trying to make it easier to figure out what happened and how to get around it, what's going on. So one of the things we've had for quite a while is email notifications, especially for extracts. If an extract fails, we'll send you a notification saying, hey, that viz that you expected to have all the right data in it is not going to have the right data until you do something about it. The way Bridge works, running on a local computer, it's actually using not just the Bridge client software itself, but other parts of the Tableau stack, the driver for your database, and it's talking to your database, obviously. And any one of those things can actually generate an error. So we don't control the content of those errors, and we actually don't particularly know what all of them mean. So from time to time, you get this thing called unknown failure. It's very frustrating. One thing that we're doing to make things better here is directing to you to where you can go to find out the actual failure. We don't send the failure details via email because we don't know what's in it, but we will show it to you on the Bridge client. So if you come out here to where this big blue arrow is and say, hey, go look at the bridge client on this computer to see the failure details about it. That may give you a little bit more information about what happened. We're also extending these email notifications, and I wanted to say how happy I am that a former employee is in the audience today, Arthi, who is our intern this last year, helped us put together email notification that if an extract is running far longer than you think that it should, it will tell you. Because if extracts don't end, we don't know, we can't know that it's a failure. So just giving you a notification like, hey, this is kind of running overtime. Maybe you want to go check on it. We are also building in the ability to just time things out. So one of the tricky things with extracts, some extracts are very, very large, and some of them just don't finish. Like maybe your database just like, nope, not going to run this anymore. So at a certain time, we can say, you know what, this one's finished. We're moving on. The default value for that will be about 8 hours, but that's something you can configure in the Bridge configuration file. There will be documentation about where to find this and how to change it when that comes out. That'll be in the first half of next year. Let's see, what else do we have here? There's a troubleshooter guide that just came up. Here's actually a picture of the details section you can go and look for in the Bridge client itself. And here's part of our troubleshooting guide. So if you're running into trouble and can't figure out what to do, this should help out a little bit. I mentioned that we are releasing Bridge clients fairly frequently now. So wouldn't it be nice if you were able to know, do I need to go and update something? And on our site settings page, we'll actually start displaying the version number. So you can see like, hey, these clients like, oh, hey, this one's kind of out of date. Maybe I should go off and update it. There are other notifications that come up in online as well, but this is one place where you can go and see a whole list. What was your question again? Yeah. Yeah. So let me see if I can say your question properly again. Hey, I've got a bunch of data sources. How can I look and see what clients they're running on and when they're running, and are they all hitting my database at the same time and like completely overloading the thing, making things slow for everybody else? It's actually pretty tricky to do right now. You'd have to go through the details pages and look at things and write things down, and that's not great. So we're making a new administrative dashboard. This is for site admins. You'll be able to go in and answer a bunch of questions like, there they are. How many of these refreshes actually worked? How long were they taking? Which ones have run recently and when did they run? What kinds of failures are happening? Which failures are happening most? Like, oh, hey, look at that. I had a bunch of failures and they all seem to be for username and password. Maybe my DBA changed the password. Like, okay, now I know I need to go in and fix those things up. One interesting thing to note here is that in the very small chance that something goes wrong, many of those things that go wrong are things that they're not things that Tableau can take care of. Those do happen. We watch them very closely. But mostly it's something that you will need to take care of. Like, hey, the credentials changed, or the table's no longer in the database, or many, many other sorts of things that, like, not things that we can make better. So, but this hopefully will give you a way of seeing across all of your extracts and understanding questions, even like, why does my database get so slow at 2 o'clock? Like, oh, John scheduled 7 extracts at that time. That's why. Then you can go find John and have a cordial chat. Whether it's connecting to what? You mean which underlying data source? Because this is currently imaginary, we can, yes. But come talk to me in the future, and we are actually still in the midst of designing this. So that's a great question. I don't actually think it's not in this particular dashboard, but yeah, that's certainly something that we could add in. I do need to, I'm thinking a little bit about what we have in the database and whether that information is available to put it in this viz, but if it is available, it should not be hard to do. But come talk to me afterwards and we'll make sure that I give you a straight answer about whether that's actually feasible. And we're very close to the end of both my time and also the talk. So other questions on this? Nope. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think the question was row-level security. Inside that, a couple different questions. Can I actually use custom SQL or initial SQL to pass identity values down through the bridge client? That's actually something that's coming. You can't use that custom SQL today. The type of query that it sends down is a little bit different. It's actually the identities get set down, but the query engine that's on the local computer isn't quite set up to handle those yet. So coming soon. That's a good reason to pick one over the other currently for your on-prem data. Your other question was about implementations of row-level security. A couple different ways to do row-level security. Passing the identity to the database that's generally stronger. It's what you would want to do. You can certainly do it as part of the calculations and the filters inside the workbook, and that's what we would recommend now, as opposed to using initial SQL because it does not work over Bridge yet. And yes, that will work just fine. And that's a way that almost all people do row-level security in online right now. So, did I answer your question? Okay, try again. Hang on just a second, sir. Don't forget to fill out your feedback survey. Yep. Yep. Correct. Yes. Yep. It's pretty soon. That's about the best ETA I can give you right now. Bridge actually doesn't know a single thing about the queries. Bridge, you think of it as the mailman, right? It like gets a package and delivers the package. It's actually the things downstream that attempt to actually use all that information together where that's not working, but it is not working, and yeah, that's soon. That's what my devs are actually working on instead of building more installation scripts. Other questions? Boy, I've got like 5 more slides, but none of them say anything terribly interesting. There are a couple other presentations that you may be able to go to. Some of these have already passed. Cloudy with 100% chance of data. That will talk a lot more about building up Tableau, Bridge, and on-prem data and cloud data. This is the team that we work with in Tableau to actually move all of our data around. So that actually will be very interesting. I think enterprise at scale, I think that one's already passed. So, but if you get a chance to see that or look it up afterwards, definitely worth taking a look. You can't come to any more of my presentations because they're all finished. I would really, really appreciate it if you would fill out our, the survey. It's a short phone survey after every one of these classes. You just have to press 1 or 2 or 3. But this information is really super helpful for us. Helps us make things better next time. So please, if you get a chance, that would be fantastic. Anything else that I can answer for anybody? Feel free to come up and ask me more questions. Actually, I do have one more thing that I did not put in my slide. Bridge actually has a section at Tableau Labs. We're putting together surveys to understand more about how performance and reliability are working for Bridge users. And we would love to sort of talk with you more and understand a little bit about what your perceptions are, and how to actually survey accurately. So if anybody has a few minutes to come talk about that at Tableau Labs, it is a scheduled event, so come down to the labs in the Data Village, sign up for a slot on the schedule, and you get to talk to someone probably far more interesting than me for a few minutes about Bridge in even a little bit more detail. Of course. It's probably not real soon. And I'm curious, like, what's attractive about that?
One, I don't have to buy a
That's a very good reason. Yeah, I agree. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, yep, great reasons. Yeah. The answer is yes, not soon, but it's definitely on the roadmap. So I wouldn't literally hold your breath, but don't give up hope. Anything else? Thank you so much for coming. I hope the rest of your conference is good.